Hello and good day today. My name is Donna. Today we're going to use tea bags to grunge up some playing cards, and you could grunge up anything with this method. It doesn't have to be just a playing card. So I'm going to start off with two different tea bags and tell you why you should use one instead of the other. And I'll also show you why you should paint your tea bags with the tea mixture rather than soak them. I've got some tea bags. There's two different brands here. I bought this cheaper brand because I thought when I tea dye my papers that this would work really well, which it does. It's great for tea dyeing pages. But for this method, all I get is two separate pieces of squares. They're too little to do a real lot with. These ones here, I get a much bigger tea bag piece. Cheap brand. These are the known brand. I just take the staple out and I use my pokey tool. I do this while it's dry. So you just very gently undo the staple. Do not rip the tea bag paper. So then your string will come away, then unfold it. And I'm just going to tip it up because the end is open, and I'm going to get rid of the tea. Then I'm going to just open up one end and very gently pull that apart. Right, so now I've got my flat piece. Right, now this one here, what we have to do is I need to cut it and cut it again, and I've got to cut it really close to the edge. Tip out the tea bag, and there's really no way for me to recycle or reuse that tea bag without cutting it up here, because it just doesn't give me any way that I can undo it without having that seam still there. So if that seam doesn't bother you, you can do it like that, but it bothers me. So for this method, I like using these folded bags, much better. Get a bigger piece of paper. Now when I soak these tea bags in the water, in hot water, they come out really, really dark. So we'll undo this one. Again, I'm being careful not to rip my papers. They are much harder to deal with after they've been soaked in the water. It's messier this way, soaking it and then taking the tea out. The paper's fragile, it feels very dry. As opposed to this paper, it's much nicer to handle. I've got to scrape off all these tea leaves that are stuck to the paper. I have pulled it apart and got a better piece of paper than that. That one is a little bit rough. Alright, so there's the plain. There's the paper that was soaked with the tea in it. And there's a piece that I put a tea bag in some hot water and then got a paintbrush and just dipped that in the hot water tea brew and then just painted it and then sat that on a plate to dry. If I wanted a little bit more colour in some areas, when it was nearly dry, come back and just do a little bit more second coat. You can glue that on there, and then you can use your distress ink and come along and just use your blender and come over it and colour it with the blender, and that is what I use to achieve this. So that works if you don't have, or if you don't want to use the T method. So that one would probably work okay on the 8 of spades, but if I was to put that on the king, it's going to cover up too much of my design. It's too dark. This one here, if it was too light, it's still going to give me that nice aged look rather than the stark white. You can really see the difference. You can really see the difference there. And if you wanted to add to it, you just do the edges with your distress ink. So let's do both of these. We'll do that one in the dark and that one in the light. Right, now I'm just going to use Mod Podge. You can add a little bit of water to it, or you can just put it on straight. Entirely up to yourself. Now before I start, I like to sandpaper my card. So I just scratch it up and it gives it a bit more age look. You can scratch up the back and that also gives it an aged look. You got that nice damaged spot there. I'm just going to plonk a little bit of water there because I don't want to water this down very much. Cover the whole card with the Mod Podge. We'll use this one. We can squish that paper together to make those rip bits disappear, and then come back over the top and squish it down. You could have put this paper on an angle, didn't have to be perfectly placed down the centre. Another thing I noticed, as soon as you put any moisture on these cards, they start to curl. This one here, it curled and I just kept bending it back that way as it was drying, and it's nice and flat now. And can you see it curling? Where it's ripped there, I'm just going to leave that and colour it with some distress ink. We'll do the same with this one. Can whack some wrinkles in it deliberately to give it some good age. Press it down. So I like the lighter one. If it's too light, you can always come back in and darken it up. Don't forget that. It's very controllable. Right, it's curling, but I'm going to leave it until it's dry enough for me to flatten out. So I'll be back shortly when they're dry. It's nearly dry, so I can persuade it to come back this way. See the difference? It doesn't take much. You can definitely see the curve in that. Just give it a little bit of help to come back that way. And there's the curve gone. Still a little tiny bit tacky. That's the best time to get rid of that roll. We can just go around, cut the edges off that. You can rip the edges if you want to really make it rough. So it's your call, whether you like it dark or whether you like it light. I know I can build on this lighter one here. I can, you know, add a little bit more colour to it. I can, like I said earlier, I can do it using the distress ink, and I can do it with the tea water. I'll just dip my brush in it and do it again. Sometimes the darker one takes away from your project and sometimes it adds to it. that's got the plain paper on it to give it something to grab to. With the vintage photo distress ink, 3 entirely different looks. And what I use them for, not just to stick in pockets and CD cases, I use them to make repositionable discs. I just cut them out using my 1-inch punch, put the repositionable glue on the back, and I'll link the video here on how I made some of these and how I use them on my envelopes. It just gives a little bit of a variation on how you can use your playing cards. Not only to do coloured paper and book pages, but use your cards as well. I think you'll get to use this technique on how to grunge up your playing cards. You can do it using tea or distress ink. This is just a little Tim Holtz tool that roughs up the edges. You can use your scissors or any tool you got if you wanted to go to that stage of making your card that little grungier. Just do it randomly here and there. Don't do it all the way along the edges. If you want it to look more natural, try and pick out a bit like that. Jam it into it. And that's all you really need to do. Just random bits here and there. And get your ink, dab it on, and just push it into those things so that you don't change them. Just pushing it in. Just on my finger. Pushing it in. Patting it on the edge. And that will get it right into the surface of that grungy bit we just made and roughed up. So there's a nice roughed up old card. You can leave it like that or do that. I think you'll get to use this technique on how to grunge up your playing cards.